The air tastes of iron and old rain. Somewhere above, a city moves on, but down here, the stone sweats and the dark has its own weight. A torch flares, then settles, and the light catches what most visitors miss. Shallow cuts in the wall, faint as breath, stubborn as a scar. A cross, not quite the church's cross. A ship drawn with a childlike simplicity that feels wrong in a place built for grown men to break. A ladder of lines, a square grid, measured, deliberate, as if someone cared about symmetry even here. For centuries, these marks were dismissed as boredom, prayer, madness, and anything but intention. Yet the more you stare, the less they behave like random scratches. Some symbols repeat across different cells in different prisons, separated by miles and years. The angles match. The spacing feels counted. It's the kind of pattern you only notice when you stop looking for treasure and start looking for communication. Imagine being a Knight Templar in chains, knowing confession is demanded, silence is punished, and paper will never leave this room. What do you do with the last thing you know? You carve it into the only surface that cannot be confiscated, and you hide it in plain sight where the world will call it nothing until someone asks the forbidden question, what if this wall is really talking, a coded broadcast in stone, waiting for the century to listen, quietly, patiently, relentlessly, today. It begins like a rumor, the kind that slips through taverns before it ever reaches a pulpit, a sealed letter, a royal order carried by riders who don't stop to rest. In the early hours, while candles still burn low and monks whisper their first prayers, the machinery of a kingdom turns in perfect silence. Doors are surrounded, keys are produced, names are read aloud with the cold certainty of paperwork, and in one coordinated sweep across towns and commanderies, the Knights Templar, once the armored guardians of Christendom, are taken as if they were thieves caught in the act, Friday, October 13th, 1307. Later centuries would cling to the date like a talisman of bad luck. But for the men inside those walls, it wasn't superstition. It was the sound of a world being rewritten. One day they are in order with banners, horses, accounts, and sacred duties. The next, they are prisoners, stripped of identity, forced to kneel under accusations so foul they seem designed to stain forever. Historians can trace the king's motives: power, debt, control. They can show how the trap closed fast, ruthless, bureaucratic, yet there's a problem that refuses to sit still. When the arrests hit, some vaults were already empty, some records were already missing, and somewhere in the hours before the net tightened, something moved, quietly, efficiently, like an operation inside the operation. What did they save? Gold, relics, names, knowledge, or something more dangerous? Proof. After the arrests, investigators expected a haul, ledgers stacked like bricks, reliquaries wrapped in silk, coins heavy enough to bruise a table. Instead, in place after place, they found absence, ritualistically. Vaults that should have been crowded were eerily clean. Chests sat sealed yet oddly light, as if someone had rehearsed the moment of inspection. Along rivers and coasts, a quieter story clung to local memory. Wagons moving at night, boats pushed off before dawn, and a Templar fleet rumored to have slipped into the fog before royal men could count the masts. This is where the timeline fractures. Royal orders were secret, yes, but secrets travel. A courier is noticed, a brother hears a whisper in a market, a commander delays breaking a seal for a single hour. That is all it takes for a disciplined network to react. Witnesses later describe nothing unusual, then contradict themselves, then forget with suspicious speed. Some swear they saw carts, others insist there were no carts, yet cannot explain. Fresh wheel ruts in the mud, the documents that could settle it shipping lists, inventories, private letters are precisely what vanished first, leaving only gaps where answers should be. And what if that emptiness is the point? If the Templars left a final message, maybe it was not a sentence carved or spoken, but an extraction, the removal of something that would outlive torture and fire. The silence becomes the clue. The missing hours become the map. The story lives in the tension between what can be proven and what refuses to disappear. Legends cling to the Knights Templar because something about their end feels unfinished, like a sentence cut short. Our task is not to repeat every rumor, nor to dismiss them out of hand, but to walk the narrow path between evidence and intuition, following each thread only as far as it can honestly go. We will trust documents when they survive scrutiny, and we will doubt them when they contradict themselves. We will treat myths not as answers, but as pressure points, because legends rarely form around nothing, where a story persists for centuries, and it often circles a real object, a real place, or a real fear someone wanted buried. The goal is not to prove a single grand theory, but to understand why so many smaller clues lean in the same direction. By the end, it should be clear why the final message may never have been a sentence, a treasure map, or a confession. It may be a system, symbols layered over actions, silence paired with movement, architecture aligned with memory, a signal designed to survive collapse, readable only when enough pieces are placed together. The arrests are the spark, dramatic and sudden, but they are only the doorway. The real mystery begins with the accusations themselves, because to understand what was hidden, we must first understand what the world was told to see clearly now. The charges arrive not as rumors, but as shock waves, heresy, idol worship, spitting on the cross, obscene kisses exchanged in secret ceremonies. To medieval ears, these are not minor sins, but spiritual annihilation. Crimes so extreme they leave no room for defense. What makes them stranger is their suddenness. For nearly 2 centuries, the Knights Templar had operated openly, audited by popes, praised from pulpits, entrusted with pilgrims and treasure alike. Then, overnight, they are accused of practicing a faith so twisted it borders on parody. The speed at which the accusations spread is telling. Scripts move faster than truth. Each charge is vivid, emotional, and easy to repeat, perfectly shaped to ignite fear and disgust. Yet, when laid side by side, they form a strange pattern. The rituals are said to be secret, yet everyone seems to know the same details. The crimes are supposedly ancient, yet no one mentioned them until the arrests were already underway. It feels less like discovery and more like performance. What if the accusations were never meant to be proven? What if they were designed as leverage, a psychological vice meant to force the order into revealing something else entirely? When you accuse men of everything, you give them nothing left to protect except the one thing they refuse to name. If the Templars carried a final secret, these charges may have been the key turned to make it surface, or to confirm, through silence alone, that it existed at all. Once the accusations are spoken, the machinery shifts from theater to extraction. The racks are prepared, the questions are asked, and the answers, strangely, begin to repeat. Across different regions, under different judges, knights confess to the same acts in nearly the same language. They deny Christ, they worship an idol, they submit to shameful rites. On the surface, it looks like guilt unfolding under pressure. But to historians who read transcripts side by side, something feels wrong. Confessions are meant to vary. Pain breaks people unevenly. yet here the statements line up too neatly, like lines traced over an invisible template. Some knights confess immediately, saying whatever is demanded to stop the agony. Others endure longer, retracting later, insisting their words were forced. And then there are the most unsettling cases, men who confess but add details that do not strengthen the accusations at all, details that seem oddly precise, almost intentional. Why would someone under torture risk consistency instead of survival? Why do certain phrases appear only once, then never again? The contradictions form a strange rhythm, as if noise is being introduced on purpose. What if these inconsistencies are not failures of testimony, but signals, a way to contaminate the record, to make the truth impossible to isolate? If everything is false, then something real can hide inside the confusion, untouched by the blades meant to cut it free. Behind the piety and proclamations stands a man with ledgers on his mind. King Philip IV of France is deeply in debt, his wars expensive, his authority contested by the very institutions that once supported him. The Templars are not just warriors, they are bankers, administrators, and keepers of financial systems that rival royal power. Seizing their wealth would be convenient. Destroying their independence would be strategic. But convenience alone does not explain the scale of what unfolds. This is not a simple asset grab. The operation feels excessive, obsessive, as if Philip is not merely collecting gold, but scrubbing something from existence. Archives are seized, symbols are defamed, names are blackened so thoroughly that even memory becomes dangerous. If wealth were the goal, the order could have been absorbed, taxed, or restructured. Instead, it is dismantled publicly, violently, with a narrative crafted to ensure no rehabilitation is possible. That suggests fear, not of swords or treasuries, but of influence that cannot be taxed or inherited. Knowledge persists in ways gold does not. If the Templars held records, maps, or truths that challenged royal authority, erasure becomes the only safe response. You do not just kill the men, you poison their reputation so no one will listen to what they might have said. In that light, the trials look less like justice and more like a firewall built against an idea. The church stands at the center of the storm, pulled between doctrine and diplomacy. On paper, the Knights Templar answer only to the Pope. In reality, popes are mortal, pressured by kings, councils, and survival itself. Letters pass quietly between Rome and Paris, cautious in tone, heavy with hesitation. Investigations are ordered, delayed, redirected. Nothing moves cleanly, and that uncertainty leaves a haunting question suspended in the air. Some church officials doubt the charges openly, disturbed by their theatrical nature and the reliance on torture. Others urge compliance, arguing that unity is more important than truth. The final decision dissolves the order without formally declaring it guilty, a legal maneuver so strange it still confuses scholars. Why destroy an institution if its crimes cannot be conclusively proven? Unless the danger lies not in what it did, but in what it knew. What if the church's role was not simply condemnation, but containment? Bureaucracy is an excellent hiding place. Documents can be misfiled, sealed, or quietly forgotten for centuries. A truth buried in procedure is safer than one burned in public. If the Templars left a final message, it may not be etched in stone or whispered in curses, but locked inside the very system that ended them. If the trial was theater, then the props matter, and the strangest props of all are the marks the knights left behind. In the medieval world, literacy is rare, but symbolism is fluent. Orders like the Templars live by signs long before They rely on words. A knot on a cord can signal rank. A particular cross can mark allegiance, geography, or instruction. Geometry is not decoration, it is theology made visible, a way of encoding meaning that survives translation and censorship. For men who traveled across borders, languages, and hostile territories, symbols were not optional. They were infrastructure. The Templars, more than most, operated inside this symbolic universe. Their churches echo specific proportions. Their seals repeat motifs, with almost obsessive consistency. Even their clothing becomes a moving signboard, broadcasting identity without explanation. To outsiders, these are badges of faith. To insiders, they function as a second language, capable of carrying layered meaning without ever being spoken aloud. This matters because symbols cannot be tortured out of a man the way words can. A confession can be forced, but a symbol only reveals itself to someone who already knows how to read it. What if the Templars understood this advantage better than their enemies? What if, instead of writing a final message that could be seized or burned, they embedded it into forms so ordinary they would be dismissed as ritual habit? Sacred geometry, repeated knots, familiar crosses, these could form sentences without letters, instructions without verbs, a message that survives precisely because no one thinks to interrogate it. If that's true, then the real archive of the Templars has been visible all along, hiding in plain sight, waiting for a reader who remembers how this language works. Among all Templar images, none is more famous or more unsettling than their seal. Two knights riding a single horse. Official explanations have always leaned toward simplicity. It represents poverty, humility, brotherhood, two men, one mount, less wealth than expected for such a powerful order. But simplicity rarely survives scrutiny, and this image refuses to settle into one meaning. The problem is that the symbol feels wrong for propaganda. Orders usually present strength, clarity, unity. This image presents imbalance, tension, even absurdity. Why choose an emblem that invites questions? Why immortalize a symbol that appears to undermine authority instead of reinforcing it? Over time, alternative interpretations pile up. Dual identity, hidden hierarchy, a public face and a secret one, a literal message that the order operates in pairs, seen and unseen. What makes the seal more intriguing is its context. It appears alongside other symbols that already carry layered meanings. It is stamped on documents meant to travel, to be seen, to authenticate. In other words, it is not private symbolism. It is a controlled message sent outward again and again. And yet, no single explanation fully satisfies. What if the image is not symbolic in the abstract, but instructional? Two forces sharing one vehicle, two truths occupying one narrative. A reminder that what is visible is never the whole structure. If the Templars left a final message, this seal may not explain it, but it teaches how to approach it. Assume duality, assume misdirection, and never accept the first meaning offered. When historians map Templar movements, a strange pattern emerges. Certain routes are traveled again and again, even when more efficient paths exist. Specific ports appear in records with suspicious frequency. Some commanderies seem strategically unimportant, yet remain heavily connected. At first glance, this looks like logistics shaped by terrain, politics, and trade. But repetition has a way of attracting attention. In intelligence work, repetition is never neutral. It can be emphasis, habit, or signal. The Templars were expert travelers, seasoned in supply lines and long-distance coordination. Inefficiency would be uncharacteristic. So why revisit the same places so consistently? Why anchor movements to locations that offer little obvious advantage? One possibility is that these sites serve purposes no longer visible: safe houses, transfer points, archives, or something even simpler, markers, punctuation in a message written across geography itself. If you treat Europe as a page, these repeated stops begin to resemble structure. A pause here, a connection there, a route that spells something when viewed from the right distance. What makes this theory uncomfortable is how easily it hides in plain sight. Historians catalog movements without asking why consistency matters. Tourists walk past ports unaware of their past significance. And if the final message was geographic rather than textual, it would survive precisely because no one thinks to read travel like language. The map doesn't misbehave, it waits. The Knights Templar were not a single fortress or archive. They were a network, hundreds of commanderies linked by shared rules, rituals, and expectations. Information moved through this system quietly, efficiently, without relying on centralized storage. In modern terms, it looks less like a medieval order and more like a distributed system, resilient to collapse. Each house followed the same rule book. Each brother knew the same rituals. That uniformity is often seen as rigidity, but it also creates encryption. When everyone shares the same internal logic, a gesture or phrase can carry meaning without explanation. Outsiders see routine, insiders see instruction. Multiply that across an entire continent, and the network itself becomes a cipher. What if the final message was never meant to be gathered in one place? What if it was broken into pieces, each meaningless alone, but coherent when the system is understood? Commanderies as nodes, symbols as data, rituals as keys that tell you how to combine fragments. Destroying one house would not destroy the message. Arresting one knight would reveal nothing. This would explain the order's strange calm in the face of annihilation. You do not panic when your secret no longer resides in any single mind or vault. If this is true, then the message may still exist today, distributed across ruins, churches, and symbols, waiting not to be found but to be read correctly. Symbols are tempting, but now we need something physical, something you can touch. So we go to the places where time got trapped. The cells were never meant to be read. They were meant to erase. Damp, narrow, and cut off from the rhythm of daylight, these rooms existed to reduce men to waiting. Yet on the walls, something survives. Carved crosses that do not match church designs, ladders climbing nowhere, boxes divided into careful squares, ships with tall masts and empty decks. These marks appear again and again, scratched into stone by men who believed they would never leave alive. For centuries, historians treated this graffiti as the language of despair. Prisoners pray, prisoners hallucinate, prisoners pass time by carving shapes. That explanation is comfortable because it keeps the story small, but the markings refuse to behave like randomness. They recur across different prisons, etched by different hands, separated by geography, but united in form. The proportions are similar. The placement feels intentional, often aligned to corners, door frames, or sight lines within the cell. Despair does not usually produce consistency. Strategy does. If you expect to die, you pray for forgiveness. If you expect your order to survive you, you leave information. And stone, unlike parchment, cannot be confiscated or burned. It can only be ignored. What if these carvings were never meant to comfort the men who made them, but to instruct someone who came later? Coordinates, not prayers. Directions, not confessions. A final act of discipline performed under the assumption that the wall itself might one day become a witness. Among all the prison carvings, the ship is the most provocative. Its lines are simple but deliberate: a hull, a mast, sometimes a flag. Critics call it fantasy, the idle dream of a man imagining freedom while chained. But the ship appears too often and too consistently to be dismissed so easily. It surfaces in prisons far from the sea, carved by men who had spent their lives managing ports, fleets, and maritime finance. This matters because rumors of a vanished Templar fleet predate the arrests. Ships that left harbor before royal agents arrived, cargo never inventoried, crews that did not return. Official records fall silent exactly where clarity is needed most. The ship carvings appear after these disappearances, not before, which raises an unsettling possibility. They are not dreams, they are records. Imagine a knight carving not what he wishes for, but what has already happened. A visual confirmation, something left by sea, something important enough to remember, but dangerous enough to never name. The wall becomes a ledger, stripped of numbers and names, readable only to those who know what to look for. Historians argue the ship is symbolic, but symbols usually exaggerate. These ships are plain, almost bureaucratic. If this is a confession, it is the quietest kind. Not an admission under torture, but a statement made in private, in stone, long after the cargo is gone. The wall does not explain what moved. It doesn't have to. It only needs to say that it did. At first glance, the grid looks unimpressive. A square divided into smaller squares, scratched with care but little artistry. To a casual observer, it resembles a game board or a counting exercise. But grids are not neutral shapes. They are frameworks. They impose order. And in the history of cryptography, they are among the oldest tools for hiding information in plain sight. Long before modern encryption, grids were used to align letters, numbers, or symbols according to shared rules. Remove the key, and the grid becomes meaningless. With the key, it becomes precise. What unsettles researchers is how closely some Templar prison grids resemble known cipher structures, despite being carved by men supposedly ignorant, desperate, and isolated. Why choose a grid at all? If the goal were prayer, a cross would suffice. If the goal were distraction, any shape would do. A grid suggests planning. It suggests that something once fit inside it, even if the contents were never carved. Perhaps the grid was meant to be completed mentally by someone trained to recognize the pattern. Or perhaps it was a reminder of a system already known, a way of saying, use the method, not the mark. No one can definitively prove these grids are codes, but no one can convincingly explain why they align so well with coded logic either. Unless someone in the order understood concealment far better than we have been willing to admit. Among the many carvings, one symbol feels different. It is smaller, less dramatic, but it appears in multiple locations with unsettling consistency. Not always alone, but often near grids or ships, as if anchoring them. Scholars debate its meaning endlessly because it does not correspond neatly to known religious symbols. It feels personal, deliberate, final. Signatures are dangerous things. They reveal authorship, but they also authenticate. This mark behaves like a stamp, not meant to explain, only to confirm. A quiet way of saying this belongs to us. It appears where the message matters most and nowhere else. That selectivity is what makes it uncomfortable. What if the Templars were not writing for historians but for successors? A future brotherhood scattered, renamed, forced underground, but still trained to recognize its own handwriting. To such readers, this symbol would not be mysterious. It would be reassuring. Proof that the message survived the walls, the fires, and the lies. We may be closer now only because enough time has passed for the noise to fade. Patterns become visible when urgency dies. The prison walls hint at a message, but to understand intent, we must look at the men who made the final decisions, especially one man standing at the center as everything burned, the last Grand Master. Jacques de Molay is often remembered as a symbol, a martyr frozen in flames. But before legend hardens, there is a man caught in narrowing corridors. He is elderly by medieval standards, summoned repeatedly to courts where the rules shift without warning. Kings demand obedience. Judges demand confession. Time itself becomes an enemy, because delay means more torture for his brothers and fewer choices left. De Molay is not commanding armies anymore. He is negotiating survival inside a script written by others. What makes his position unbearable is that he knows the order is already finished in name. Banners are down, commanderies are seized. Whatever the Templars were as a public institution is gone. What remains is responsibility to the men still alive and to whatever truth the order carried that could not be allowed to surface. Every word he speaks is weighed, not for how it saves him, but for how it might expose others. In this light, his apparent compliance begins to look strange. He confesses publicly, visibly. He seems to bend. Historians often describe this as weakness, exhaustion, or fear. But what if it was camouflage? What if surrender was the only way to buy time, to let something else finish moving beyond reach? A confession can be walked back. A burned secret cannot. De Molay's silence on certain matters, even under pressure, suggests calculation. His final message may not have been whispered in shadows, but performed openly, disguised as collapse, while the real work continued elsewhere. The moment of reversal arrives like a fracture in reality. After years of pressure, after public confessions that seem to seal the order's guilt, Jacques de Molay suddenly changes course. Standing before authorities, knowing exactly what awaits him, he retracts everything. He declares the order innocent. He accepts death without negotiation. To modernize, it feels impulsive, even reckless. To medieval observers, it is shocking, bordering on suicidal. Historians struggle with the timing. Why now? Why not earlier, when the damage might have been limited? Why not later, when hope of mercy still existed? The decision makes sense only if timing itself was the point. A message delivered too early could be intercepted too late, and it becomes meaningless. De Molay's reversal lands at the precise moment when there is nothing left to save except integrity. What if he was waiting for confirmation, not from heaven, but from men on the ground? A fleet safely gone, archives dispersed, symbols carved, networks dissolved into new names. Once the message was no longer vulnerable, he no longer needed to play along. Retracting his confession ensured that history would remain unsettled. The doubt would poison the official narrative forever. By choosing death openly, he locked that doubt in place. Compliance would have closed the case. Defiance reopened it for centuries. His silence about specifics becomes louder than any testimony. If the truth were harmless, there would be no need for this timing, unless his final act was not about saving himself, but sealing the survival of something far larger. According to legend, as the flames rose, Jacques de Molay issued a curse, calling the Pope and the King to face divine judgment within the year. Both would indeed die soon after, a coincidence so perfect it fossilized into myth. Skeptics dismiss it as invention, added later to dramatize the story. Believers treat it as proof of supernatural justice, but neither explanation fully accounts for its persistence. Curses are messages designed to travel. They don't require accuracy to be effective, only belief. In a medieval world shaped by fear of divine retribution, a curse aimed precisely at those who orchestrated the destruction of the order functions like a psychological weapon. It ensures unease. It plants a seed of doubt that no amount of authority can fully uproot. What if the curse was neither miracle nor fiction, but strategy? A warning label attached to the narrative itself. Anyone who digs too deeply, anyone who benefits too directly, is reminded that consequences follow, not mystical ones necessarily, but political, reputational, existential. The curse transforms the story into dangerous ground. By framing his final words this way, de Molay ensured the aftermath would be unstable. Kings might win trials, but they would lose certainty. Popes might dissolve orders, but they would inherit anxiety. The curse doesn't explain anything, and that is its power. It redirects attention from facts to fear, creating space for the real message to remain untouched. While the world argues about flames and fate instead, the execution is not hidden. It is staged, a public island, a gathered crowd, witnesses who will carry the story outward. Fire, the most final of medieval punishments, chosen not for efficiency, but for symbolism. Jacques de Molay is bound, not silenced. His words are heard. His posture is observed. Everything about the scene suggests intention. Executions are meant to end stories. This one begins new ones. De Molay does not beg. He does not bargain. He speaks clearly, retracting his confession and reaffirming the order's innocence. In doing so, he turns the execution into a transmission. A final verification that whatever the Templars were accused of, they did not surrender their truth to survive. In modern terms, it looks like authentication, a final checksum. By dying publicly without recanting again, he proves consistency. He signals to anyone watching and to anyone who will hear later that the order's silence was not ignorance or guilt, but choice. Fire consumes his body, but it cannot consume what has already moved beyond reach. If the Templars left a final message, this is the moment it becomes sealed, not because it is revealed, but because it is proven secure. The flames do not mark defeat, they mark completion. And if the message survived the fire, it had to travel. So the story moves on, following the roots, some real, some imagined, where the remnants of an order dissolved into history, carrying something the world was never meant to see whole. While the order was crushed in France, the story bends sharply at the border of Portugal. Here, something unusual happens. The Templars are not burned, not erased, not publicly disgraced. Instead, they are dissolved on paper and reborn almost immediately under a new name, the Order of Christ. The same men, the same lands, the same routines, only the label changes. To historians, this looks like political compromise. To a strategist, it looks like continuity disguised as obedience. This quiet transformation raises an uncomfortable question. If the goal was survival, why risk such visibility at all? Unless survival was not just about bodies, but about transmission. A renamed order can carry memory without attracting attention. Rituals can persist under altered language. Symbols can be adjusted just enough to appear new while still speaking to those trained to recognize them. What if the final message was not something to be hidden and forgotten, but something meant to move forward intact? Rebranding is one of the oldest tools of concealment. You don't lock the secret away, you let it walk, dressed differently, protected by legitimacy. In Portugal, the Templars did not vanish, they adapted. And adaptation suggests planning, not panic. The message, whatever it was, may have survived not in vaults or ships, but in living systems, passed hand to hand, generation to generation, under a name the world no longer feared. Scotland enters the Templar story like a shadow at dusk. Just as Europe becomes hostile, Scotland is already at war with England, its authority fragmented, its borders unstable. Papal authority is contested, royal enforcement is inconsistent. In other words, it is the worst possible place to govern and the best possible place to disappear. Almost immediately, legends take root. Templars fleeing north, finding sanctuary among enemies of the English crown. Historians argue endlessly over the evidence. Records are sparse, claims are exaggerated, but the timing is difficult to ignore. When an organization skilled in logistics needs cover, chaos is ideal. War disrupts record keeping. Borders blur, allegiances shift. Men can arrive without explanation and leave without trace. What looks like rumor may simply be activity that left no stable archive behind. Scotland's appeal is not mystical, it is practical. It offers plausible deniability. If a Templar appears there, he can be dismissed as a mercenary, a refugee, a knight without a master. Legends fill the silence because documentation cannot survive constant conflict, and that silence becomes fertile ground. What if Scotland's role was not as a final refuge, but as a corridor, a place where identities could be shed, messages handed off, and continuity preserved under cover of chaos? Not a destination, but a blind spot. Switzerland's association with secrecy and finance tempts easy conclusions, but the medieval reality is subtler. The Templars were not bankers in the modern sense, yet they managed systems of trust that crossed borders, deposits, transfers, safekeeping. When persecution loomed, such systems would be far more valuable than piles of gold. Assets can be seized. Structures are harder to identify. Claims of a direct Templar to Swiss banking lineage are controversial and often overstated. No clean paper trail survives, but that absence may be the point. A system designed to protect value under threat would aim to leave no clear ownership, no central vault, no single failure point. Wealth becomes abstracted, embedded in obligations, relationships, and mutual guarantees. Imagine protecting assets by dissolving ownership itself. No order, no treasure to seize, only trust networks that continue functioning because they never belong to anyone officially. This would explain why investigators found empty vaults but could never trace where the value went. It didn't go anywhere. It transformed. If the final message involved survival under persecution, finance would be an unlikely but powerful vehicle, not as hoarded gold, but as a lesson in how to endure without being seen. A system so quiet it looks like nothing at all. Taken together, these dispersals do not look like collapse. They look like reconfiguration. Portugal preserves identity through renaming. Scotland provides cover through instability. Central Europe offers abstraction through systems rather than symbols. Each path alone seems speculative. Together they form a pattern. Disappearance without destruction. The Templars had always been more than a location. They were a network bound by rules, training, and shared understanding. When the banner fell, the network did not need to announce itself. It only needed to persist quietly, embedded in new forms, protected by fragmentation. A message stored in one place can be found. A message distributed across borders becomes invisible. This reframes the search entirely. If the final message exists, it may not reside in one country, one vault, or one artifact. It may be stitched across Europe like a quilt, each piece unremarkable on its own. Only when assembled does it reveal intent. Legends prefer a single answer. A hidden castle, a buried treasure. But history often works sideways. The next step is not to chase another rumor, but to enter the buildings where memory fossilized, places where stone listened and whispers never fully left. Walk into the Temple Church in London and most people look up. The round nave draws the eye heavenward, inviting thoughts of Jerusalem, of crusade and prayer. Very few look down. Beneath worn shoes and centuries of dust lie the effigies of knights carved in stone, hands folded, legs crossed, swords resting as if still on watch. They are treated as funerary art, historical decoration, the medieval equivalent of a museum label carved in marble, but stone remembers more than names. The positioning of these effigies is not random. Their alignment, spacing, and orientation follow rules that feel deliberate rather than aesthetic. Floor patterns echo ratios found elsewhere in Templar architecture, repeated quietly across regions. People walk over them every day, tracing invisible paths with their feet, never realizing they are participating in a design older than the building itself. What if the message was never meant to be hidden underground, but flattened into visibility so complete it disappears? Decoration is the safest disguise. No one interrogates what they assume is ornamental. Yet, in a world where symbols were language, a floor could speak as clearly as a manuscript. These churches were not just places of worship, they were repositories of memory. If the Templars needed a medium that could not be seized or burned, stone offered permanence without suspicion. The message may be beneath our feet, ignored not because it is obscure, but because it is too familiar to question. Rosslyn Chapel feels like a contradiction carved in stone. Built generations after the official end of the Knights Templar, it nonetheless overflows with imagery that feels uncomfortably familiar. Spirals, star patterns, vegetal motifs, and symbols that echo earlier Templar sites appear here as if copied from a memory no one admits to having. This is where the timeline begins to fray. Critics argue coincidence, shared medieval symbolism, later romantic projection, all valid cautions. But the unease remains because Rosslyn does not merely resemble earlier sites, it seems to reference them selectively, as if recalling specific themes rather than general styles. Memory behaves this way. It preserves fragments, not wholes. What if architecture itself became the vehicle of transmission? Builders learning from builders, patterns passed down without explanation, preserved because they were beautiful, not because they were understood. A message does not need conscious intent in every generation to survive. It only needs repetition. This reframes the problem of time. Rosslyn may not be evidence of Templars surviving physically, but of ideas surviving structurally. Stone remembers what people forget, and if later sites appear to remember Templar themes, it may be because memory was always the mechanism, encoded into design, waiting patiently for someone to notice the echoes and ask why they sound so deliberate. Sacred geometry is often treated as mystical ornamentation, medieval obsession with numbers and beauty. But geometry also solves practical problems. It allows builders to replicate complex designs without written instructions. Ratios travel better than words. Alignments persist even when language changes. For an order concerned with longevity, geometry offered a silent medium of precision. Templar-associated buildings repeat certain proportions with remarkable consistency. Circles within squares, specific ratios between nave and altar, alignments that track celestial events or geographic bearings. These are not necessary for worship, nor are they common across all medieval churches. They suggest intention beyond aesthetics. What if these ratios function like data storage, a blueprint that doubles as a cipher? Without the key, it is just architecture. With the key, it becomes information preserved in stone. You cannot torture a wall into revealing its meaning. You cannot confiscate geometry. You can only fail to notice it. This would explain the Templars' confidence in using architecture as memory. Buildings outlast orders, stones survive trials. A message embedded in structure is immune to political shifts. If the final message exists, it may not be written anywhere at all. It may be measured, aligned, and repeated, waiting for someone to stop asking what a building says and start asking how it was built. Every theory strains under anomalies, and here the anomaly is subtle but persistent. In several sites linked loosely by Templar influence, there appears a detail that does not belong, a symbol too advanced, a motif that arrives too early, an alignment that seems to anticipate knowledge not widely recognized at the time. Each instance alone is dismissible. Together they whisper. Historians often explain these as later modifications or coincidences, but the explanations never fully satisfy. The detail feels intentional, like a deliberate discord in an otherwise harmonious design. Musicians use dissonance to draw attention. Cryptographers use anomalies as markers. This could be the same instinct at work. What if this out-of-place element is a signature, not meant to blend in, but to be noticed by the right observer? A way of saying, this was done on purpose. A controlled error that proves authorship without revealing content. If the Templars left a final message, it would need authentication as much as concealment. Anyone can invent a theory. Only insiders know where to place the wrong note. This detail may be the most dangerous clue of all because it suggests the message was designed to be found eventually. Stone can preserve a signal, but it still needs a key. And so we turn to the seekers, the ones who claim they had it. When the Knights Templar vanished from official history, they did not vanish from imagination. Their destruction was too sudden, too theatrical, too unresolved to fade quietly. Almost immediately, stories began to grow in the gaps. Survivors, secret lineages, hidden wisdom carried forward under new names. What should have been an ending became fertile ground for beginnings. This is how afterlives are born. When an institution is erased without explanation, people search for continuity elsewhere. Over time, fragments of the Templar story attach themselves to new groups, new rituals, new identities. Some of these connections are fabricated, others exaggerated, but the persistence itself is revealing. The Templars become less a historical order and more a symbolic ancestor, a source of borrowed legitimacy and mystery. What if the final message never existed as a document at all? Documents decay, burn, and incriminate. Rituals endure. A gesture repeated without explanation can outlive empires. A ceremony performed because it has always been done this way can preserve structure long after meaning is forgotten. In that sense, ritual is the perfect container for forbidden knowledge. Centuries later, people repeat forms, stripped of context, unaware they may be carrying fragments of something older. The message survives, but like a word passed down through generations, its pronunciation remains while its definition erodes. The afterlife of the Templars may not be about survival of men, but survival of patterns, moving quietly from ending to beginning, unnoticed. No inheritance claim provokes more argument than the one linking the Knights Templar to Freemasonry. Some see a direct lineage, others dismiss it as romantic invention. Historians point out the chronological gaps, the lack of documentation, the danger of retroactive myth-making, all fair cautions, and yet the debate itself has become part of the mystery. Freemasonry emerges publicly centuries later, wrapped in symbols, rituals, and an obsession with building, geometry, and moral secrecy. None of this proves Templar descent. but it does raise a quieter question. Why does the conversation never resolve? Evidence is neither strong enough to confirm nor weak enough to erase the connection entirely. The argument loops endlessly, consuming attention without producing clarity. What if that ambiguity is not accidental? Confusion is a powerful shield. When historians argue over lineage, they are distracted from function. Whether or not Freemasons inherited anything directly from the Templars, they clearly inherited an environment where meaning is layered, access is graded, and understanding is earned, not explained. If a final message survived, debate would be its natural camouflage. A secret does not need everyone to believe it exists. It only needs them to argue about whether it does. In that noise, real transmission becomes almost invisible, protected by skepticism on one side and obsession on the other. As centuries pass, the Templars become less historical and more profitable. Alchemists, mystics, secret societies, and later writers pile symbols onto them like layers of paint. The cross becomes enchanted. The treasure becomes infinite. The wisdom becomes cosmic. By the time modern occultism emerges, the Templars are no longer an order, but a brand. This explosion of symbolism creates distance from reality, but it also creates repetition. Certain motifs refuse to disappear: sacred geometry, duality, hidden knowledge passed through initiation. Even in traditions openly invented, these elements keep resurfacing. Critics argue this is borrowing without substance, the recycling of medieval aesthetics, yet the consistency is difficult to ignore. Why do invented systems gravitate toward the same symbolic core? Why do so many false maps point in roughly the same direction? One explanation is imitation, another is echo. When a sound is loud enough, even distorted reflections carry its shape. If something real once existed at the center, layers of invention would naturally accumulate around it. The market feeds on mystery, but it also preserves it, unintentionally keeping certain structures alive. The danger is not that the truth is lost, but that it is buried under so much meaning that no one knows which layer to peel back first. Today, the search for the Templars' final message is crowded. Maps promise treasure, videos promise revelations, hoaxes multiply faster than corrections. Every ruin becomes the place, every symbol the key. The saturation feels like failure, but it may be the final layer of concealment. When everything claims to be the answer, nothing can be verified. Serious research is drowned out by spectacle. Skeptics disengage. Believers fracture into competing certainties. The result is paralysis. No single claim can rise above the noise long enough to be tested properly. What if this is exactly the environment in which a real signal survives best? A single authentic message would be safest where attention is scattered, where credibility is exhausted, and where certainty itself is suspect. Camouflage does not always require darkness. Sometimes it requires brightness, distraction, excess. The great spoiler problem is not that there are too many wrong answers. It is that wrong answers are indistinguishable from sincere ones at a glance. To cut through this noise, fascination is not enough. What's required next is method, disciplined skepticism, modern tools, and the willingness to follow evidence even when it ruins the story we want to believe. For all the fires, seizures, and deliberate erasures, paper has a stubborn way of surviving. A charter misfiled in a cathedral archive, a copy preserved because no one thought it mattered, a seal impression pressed into wax, detached from the document it once authenticated. These fragments are all that remain of a paper trail meant to be destroyed, and yet they quietly reshape what historians thought they knew. Some documents contradict the official story, not through dramatic revelations, but through small inconsistencies. A date that doesn't align, a phrase repeated across unrelated records, a legal formulation that appears where it shouldn't. These are easy to overlook because they read like routine administration. But routine is exactly where secrets hide best. What if one of these phrases is not descriptive, but functional? A lock mistaken for a sentence. Medieval bureaucratic language was rigid, repetitive, and precise. Alter one word and meaning shifts dramatically. If the Templars embedded instructions into official correspondence, it would look indistinguishable from paperwork to anyone not trained to see the deviation. Modern rediscoveries have already forced historians to revise assumptions about the order's finances, reach, and internal discipline. Each revision narrows the space where the final message could hide, not in sensational revelations, but in overlooked margins. The danger is not that the evidence is gone, it's that we've been reading it too literally, searching for confession where we should be searching for mechanism. There is a persistent myth that sophisticated encryption belongs to the modern world. Computers, algorithms, mathematics beyond medieval reach, but secrecy long predates technology. Simple systems, when applied consistently, can endure far longer than complex ones. In fact, simplicity is often the point. Medieval codes relied on substitution, transposition, symbols, and shared context. A message could be hidden in plain language if the reader knew which letters mattered. A grid could rearrange meaning without ever displaying it. A symbol could stand in for an entire concept. None of this required advanced mathematics, only discipline and agreement. What unsettles historians is how often certain patterns appear around Templar-associated material, repetition without explanation, structures that resemble known cipher techniques, yet are dismissed because they appear too obvious to be intentional. That assumption may be backward. A low-tech code survives precisely because it doesn't attract attention. What if the final message was designed to outlive its makers? A code meant to survive illiteracy, censorship, and time itself, something robust enough to persist through centuries of misunderstanding. Modern cryptanalysis often fails here because it looks for complexity. The Templars may have relied on endurance instead, a method so simple it becomes invisible, waiting for someone patient enough to stop overthinking it. Gold bends the search. It simplifies motive. It offers a satisfying ending. Find the treasure, and the mystery is solved. This is why so many theories orbit chests, vaults, and hidden hoards. Treasure promises closure, but it also shuts down curiosity because once wealth is assumed, everything else becomes decoration. The historical problem is that gold is easy to trace. It leaves records. It moves visibly. And when investigators searched Templar sites, they did not find what obsession promised. Vaults were empty, but not looted in panic. Accounts were missing, but not chaotic. It felt intentional. What if the obsession with treasure is the final misdirection? If the Templars understood how people think, they would know that future seekers would chase wealth first. That chase would consume centuries of attention, while the real message remained untouched. Gold attracts the greedy, not the careful. A message about why gold doesn't matter would be dangerous to power structures built on debt and control. Such a message would never be hidden alongside treasure. It would be hidden behind it. The longer people search for coins, the longer they ignore the possibility that the true inheritance was structural knowledge, how to survive, how to move value without owning it, how to resist erasure without fighting. That kind of treasure is invisible by design. At some point, fragments must be assembled, even if the result remains uncertain. Symbols without context are noise. Documents without structure are anecdotes. Architecture without method is aesthetics. But when patterns align across categories, a theory begins to form, not as certainty, but as coherence. The strongest possibility is not a single hidden object, but a system, a three-part mechanism designed to survive collapse. First, symbols that signal authenticity and intent without revealing content. Second, locations chosen not for secrecy, but for permanence and repetition. Churches, routes, rituals. Third, an action required of the reader, a way of engaging that activates the message rather than simply revealing it. This would explain why no one has found the final message. It was never meant to be found like treasure. It was meant to be understood patiently, part by part, over time. Each fragment confirms the next, but none reveal the whole alone. Such a system rewards restraint. It resists spectacle, and it survives precisely because it refuses to announce itself. We have gathered the shards: paper, stone, symbols, silence. Now comes the most dangerous step in any mystery. Not discovery, but interpretation. We attempt to read the message out loud, knowing that once spoken, it can never be unheard. One possibility stands apart from treasure maps and secret vaults because it explains almost everything else. The final message was a warning, not mystical, not financial, but structural. A lesson learned too early by an order that rose on trust and fell to fear. The Templars lived inside institutions long enough to understand a dangerous pattern. Power invites dependency. Dependency invites resentment, and resentment eventually turns truth into treason. From this angle, the message was never about hiding from kings. It was about outlasting them. The trials show how quickly legitimacy can be inverted. Yesterday's defenders of the faith become today's heretics with the stroke of a pen. No new evidence is required, only a narrative powerful enough to justify seizure and silence. That pattern did not end in the 14th century. It repeats whenever institutions grow too effective, too independent, too difficult to control. What if the Templars recognized this inevitability and chose not to fight it directly? A warning is only useful if it survives. Instead of resisting destruction, they allowed it, embedding the lesson in their disappearance. Watch how we were erased. Watch how easily the world agreed. Remember this when you build something powerful. Such a message would explain the restraint, the refusal to reveal everything, even under torture. A warning loses force if it becomes spectacle. By leaving behind only fragments, the Templars ensured the story would never fully settle. Every generation that revisits it reenacts the lesson. Power repeats, and so does the price of standing outside it. Another possibility shifts the focus from meaning to method. The final message may be a map, but not one that leads to gold. Instead, it points toward proof, evidence scattered deliberately across places designed to endure. Churches, archives, routes, rituals. Not a single cache, but a breadcrumb trail meant to be followed slowly by people with patience rather than ambition. This would explain why leads cluster around certain types of sites rather than specific coordinates. Sacred buildings preserve memory. Bureaucratic archives preserve language. Travel routes preserve repetition. Each category holds a different kind of fragment, meaningless alone but powerful together. A map like this would not shout directions. It would reward pattern recognition. What proof might matter enough to justify such care? Perhaps records that contradict the official charges. perhaps documentation of financial systems that threatened monarchies, perhaps correspondence revealing alliances never meant to be public. Whatever it is, its power would not lie in shock, but in quiet destabilization of accepted history. A map to proof must be survivable. Gold tempts theft. Documents tempt destruction. But a distributed trail frustrates both. Even if parts are lost, the structure remains legible. Survivors do not need everything. They need enough. If this is the message, then it has not failed. It has simply waited. Every rediscovered fragment moves someone one step further along a path designed centuries ago, not for treasure hunters, but for readers who understand that evidence changes the world more slowly and more permanently than wealth. The most unsettling possibility is that the final message was never meant for everyone, not even for most people. Instead, it functions as a filter, a test disguised as a mystery. Those who approach it seeking gold, power, or certainty will always fail because their assumptions blind them to the signal. In this interpretation, confusion is not a flaw. It is the mechanism. The message appears fragmented, contradictory, and frustrating by design. Only someone willing to sit with uncertainty, to discard spectacular answers, and to prioritize truth over reward can even begin to see coherence. Greed disqualifies, impatience disqualifies, certainty disqualifies. This aligns with the order's internal culture: initiation, discipline, restraint, knowledge revealed gradually, never all at once. The message would mirror the values of its creators, not a confession, but an identity check. Are you here to take or to understand? Such a system would be almost impossible to seize. You cannot steal a test. You cannot burn discernment. The message exists only when approached correctly and vanishes the moment someone tries to exploit it. That is why it appears invisible to some and overwhelming to others. If the Templars designed it this way, they solved the ultimate problem of secrecy. They did not hide the message, they hid the reader. Despite centuries of investigation, one anomaly remains stubbornly unresolved. Patterns align across prisons, documents, architecture, and ritual, yet never quite close into certainty. Each explanation feels plausible, but incomplete. This lingering imbalance is not a failure of research. It may be the final feature of the message itself. A signal that resolves completely can be neutralized. A mystery that remains active continues to work. It pulls attention forward, generation after generation, forcing each era to confront the same uncomfortable questions about power, truth, and survival. Debunkings come and go, but the core unease remains because the structure underneath has not been dismantled. What if the Knights Templar succeeded perfectly? Not by preserving a secret intact, but by ensuring it could never be seized. A message distributed across stone, paper, memory, and silence. Impossible to own, impossible to destroy, only discoverable through alignment of method, intent, and patience. The final message may not be something you find and hold. It may be something you recognize briefly when the pieces line up just enough, and then it slips away again, leaving behind a question rather than an answer. That may be the point, a message that survives not because it is hidden, but because it teaches you how to look.